just start with a little story. I have 3 daughters, and they're older now. And when they were really small, maybe 2 years old, I would play a little game with them. I mean, they were just learning how to talk. But I play a little game with them, and I'd just ask them just some random question, you know, like, what color are your eyes? And they have, all 3 of them have brown eyes. And they'd say, my eyes are brown. I said, I think they're blue. And they'd laugh and say, no, they're brown, because they'd been told they were brown. And, you know, and we'd go back and forth a couple of times, you know, and they would talk, you know, they like to play these silly games. But eventually, they don't like being told something that's not true. And they start getting mad. My youngest one would play a game, you know, would play along a little more, saying, well, I can see my eyes in the mirror. And I would say, well, but, you know, I could see your eyes. You can't see your own eyes, you know. But the youngest would get, you know, try to use logic and say, well, I can see my eyes in the mirror. And just as they started to get mad, I had to keep the game fun. I would say, okay, I would twist it diabolically, really. That's what I would do. I would say, I agree with you that you believe your eyes are brown, but I believe they're blue. So isn't your belief the same as my belief? And, you know, every one of them would be, no, they're brown. You know, they know there was an objective truth. They would know what it was. They'd start getting, and as soon as they said that, I would say, you're right. And don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. The point of it was this: words have real meaning. There is objective meaning. We all know that. I mean, if words don't have real meaning, there's no such thing as a lie. Right? To lie means to say something that is opposite to what is a universal truth. We can all see, you know, what color shirt you're wearing, and what, you know, it's obvious. And let me just second what Reverend Kraft said before. The same goes for morality. All right? For morality. When I tell my students, you know, the best evidence, in my opinion, the best evidence we have that God exists is He's already written these self-evident truths on our hearts. You don't, you should believe in the Bible, but you don't have to believe in the Bible to believe in these self-evident truths. Every religion, the Quran says, you shall not kill. The Buddhist writings say, you shall not kill. Every religion says that. Why? It's written on our hearts. And even if those religions, you know, some of these religions may be even, you know, satanic and evil in some ways, they couldn't get away from the self-evident truths, or nobody would take them seriously. God's written, we have inside knowledge of it. All right? If I were to go and say, you know, I'm one of the biggest guys here, and take one of the younger boys, you know, the guy in the end here, he's not that big, and just bam, punch him in the mouth. All right? And break his jaw. Everybody here would say, that's not right. There isn't one person here who would say, that's not right. Or maybe if he's got an older brother, he would say, okay? But everybody would know, and you don't have to be instructed on it, you just know it. All right? This is what God's written on our hearts. We know that just from existing. You know, C.S. Lewis, the great Christian writer, said we have inside knowledge as humans. You know, if I were to do the same, if a dog were to do the same thing, and go and, you know, bite another dog, the other dog wouldn't say, that's not fair. They don't have that knowledge. All right? If I threw a steak, you know, into a pit with hungry wolves, they wouldn't argue, well, we should be fair. What's fair? They just fight over it. Right? We would argue, well, okay, who's the hungriest? You know, we would try to do something that is related to morality. So, morality plays into this. Everything has to start with God. A little bit of my talk, a little bit of it's going to overlap with Reverend Kraft's thing. But when we talk about objective meaning to words, that's what the U.S. Constitution, you know, when we write a Constitution, we mean for it to have an objective meaning. Not, oh, well, whatever you think it means in some future thing. Most of the people in politics today, they say, oh, we have a living constitution. They usually mean, it means it's a dead letter, all right? Which means we should ignore it completely. When they say living constitution, they don't mean apply those words and the intent of those words to today. They mean, just get rid of it. We don't really want to pay attention to it. All right? Ask yourselves, if someone uses that phrase, living constitution, are they applying the words in the Constitution to problems today, or are they just using it as a way of disposing or getting rid of the phrase that they don't like? All right? Why do we have a Constitution? We have a Constitution to protect rights and to bind people down with a clear set of guidelines. The words have meaning. Just when I say blue eyes, if blue can be reinterpreted to mean 7,
Yeah.
well, you know, you don't have 7 eyes, okay? Blue can be reinterpreted to mean Thursday. You don't have to know. It has a specific meaning, okay? A couple years ago, Time magazine came out with this headline, Constitution Doesn't Matter, and of course it's going through a paper shredder here. It is largely under threat, and that's going to be part of my talk today too. How it relates to today and how it's being attacked, and mostly through being ignored by saying, oh, it's a living constitution, or, well, it was created in the horse and buggy days, and we're in modern technology where we have airplanes. The other way is interpretation, all right? I was actually told I was on jury duty a while back, and I was told by a federal judge, I was applying the Constitution to a case, and he said, do you really think you have the authority to interpret the Constitution? And I said to him with a straight face, I said, I need an interpreter to read Sanskrit. I need an interpreter to read Greek. But the Constitution is written in English. I don't need an interpreter to read English. I can read English just fine.
Come on.
In fact, the text of the U.S. Constitution, I don't want to do that just yet. Yeah. This is, I'm going to go back here. I'm going to go back. I don't want to do that just yet. Okay, I am going to play this. A couple of you guys may remember it. See if I can turn the volume up. Do we have speakers here? No? I'll have to play on my beats here. But the judge said, do you think you have the interpreter? I said, no, I don't need an interpreter reading English. And at the school I teach at, we subscribe to a number of online databases. The U.S. Constitution is written to the 11th grade reading level. I don't know if you know that, but I mean, they have computer programs that judge the difficulty in reading and how long the sentences are, how big the words are, how antiquated the words are. 11th graders can read the Constitution. And in my school, we teach it in the 10th grade, but it's an 11th grade reading level. So you guys, most of you guys are reading above your grade level anyway, so no problem there. All right, let's see if I can do this. All right. This is a video about the understanding of the Constitution, very short video, that we recorded at the camp 2 years ago. A couple of you guys are still around who were in it. And it's all about it's a typical story of Mom and Dad go on vacation, and they leave Billy home alone. And they give him instructions, and he interprets them. Here we go.
I love this one. Yeah.
Can you guys hear it? You can't hear it, can you? All right, hold on. Let me try it again.
He's like,
Oh, do we have speakers?
Oh, where's put them to work as well.
somebody blew the speakers.
Put the mic near the,
All I've got is a 1/8 here.
Put the mic down, I'll turn the gain.
Oh, all right. Oh, I got you. All right. All right, let me do that.
Somebody in here knows.
Connor and I are going out of town for a week on an anniversary vacation. I let you know I'm very explicit.
Yeah, okay, Mom, I got it.
Hey, Billy, listen to your mother, make her proud.
Hey, I got it.
Billy, you may use this card to withdraw money from the ATM or use as a check card to buy food, beverages, and gas, but only use our bank's ATM to avoid any fees. You may buy bread, you may buy milk, you may buy fresh veggies, you may buy fresh fruit, you may buy lean meat, you may buy fruit juice, you may fill the car's tank once, you may use the car when it is necessary to get the things on this list. P.S. You may not use the car or the card for any purpose other than the purposes that we have stated.
You gotta fight for your right to
Honey, there's $1,500 missing from the checking account.
Billy,
What, huh?
the hell's going on here?
They've been drinking and smoking.
What's this? This clearly isn't Marlboro's.
You need to explain yourself, mister.
Right now.
Well, you said I could buy food, so pizza and burritos is a type of food. And you said I could buy beverages with the card, and, well, beer and rum are obviously beverages. And, well, gas, I figured you light a weed or some cigarettes and it puts out the type of gas.
Don't be smart.
I only used the card when I thought it was necessary, like going to the Red Sox game and buying my friends some popcorn and some hot dogs.
What do you think will happen to Billy? I think his parents would be very unhappy and punish him for a long time. While most parents across the country would do just that, sadly, Billy will most likely be re-elected. Congress and the courts are also obligated to follow a note with the same kind of listed powers called the U.S. Constitution. And they apply the U.S. Constitution exactly the same way Billy applied his mother's note. Congress has a short list of powers called enumerated powers. Congress can raise an army and a navy, punish piracies in the high seas, regulate commerce among the states, set rules for bankruptcies, grant copyright and patents for a limited time, and a few others. But Congress does many, many things that are not authorized by the U.S. Constitution. Indeed, Mom's note to Billy resembled the U.S. Constitution in more than one way. Billy dishonestly tried to exploit what he saw as a loophole in Mom's note, permitting him to buy food, beverages, and gas. And Congress does the same thing with the Constitution's general welfare or commerce clauses. Mom left a list of things that Billy can do, just as the U.S. Constitution does. But Mom's note also contained an explicit prohibition on anything else being done with the car and the check card. Remember P.S. you cannot do anything that is not on the list? That's almost identical to the 10th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which states that, quote, powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. Yet the Congress does a long list of things that are not explicitly enumerated in the Constitution. The American people need to rise up, like Billy's parents are about to do, and demand that Congress, the President, and the courts follow the limits of the U.S. Constitution, or they will soon find that they have a government of unlimited powers, which is the textbook definition of totalitarianism.
We've got a Madison crowd.
Hey, that's good.
Okay. All right. So, in order to lay the foundation, I know I'm like halfway into my talk already, but I'm still laying the foundation here of the Constitution. It goes back to England. It goes back, in fact, there's a story of the famous economist, Murray Rothbard, who went on a vacation to England. He was an American citizen, he was born in America. And he says, I'm going back to visit my ancestors. And a friend of his says, what are you, crazy? You're a Hungarian Jew. Your ancestors never went within 500 miles of England. And he says, well, wait a minute though. I'm an American, and my heritage is through England. And let me explain a little bit about that. Our system we get from the common law in England, all right? We get things from England that many of which are nowhere else. We have trial by jury, all right? That comes from England in the common law. We have what's called stare decisis. This is what Reverend Kraft talked about, which is precedent. Deciding something that's, you guys may or may not like all the rules here at camp, all right? I know it would be difficult for me to give up the phone, all right? It would be difficult for me to give up the phone. But let's face it, it's got to be enforced fairly. If we were to say, if Mr. Shurtleff were to say, okay, you can have a phone, and in the next instance say, well, you're going to get punished for having a phone, well, that's not fair. Even if it's a bad rule, if it's enforced uniformly, it's a good thing. So that's what stare decisis means. Stay based on past precedents. Ex post facto laws. I usually tell my students, stand up. All right? All right. All students standing up get kicked out of camp. No, not fair, right? Not fair, because I made the rule after it was already done. You can only make rules for the future. All right? These are things, habeas corpus. They can't just throw you in prison without giving you some sort of a court hearing. Now, you can be in prison awaiting trial. If they catch you as an axe murderer and you're holding the axe with the blood dripping off the axe and the body's right below it, all right? They're going to be able to hold you in court, but they have to hold you until your trial. But you have to go to court the very next day. And they have to justify whether or not you can be detained to your trial. That's habeas corpus. We get all that from England. A lot of our Bill of Rights and Constitution comes directly from England. The English don't have a constitution. When the English talk about their constitution, it's 3 documents: the Magna Carta, the Petition of Right, and the English Bill of Rights. And a lot of the words are almost exactly the same thing. The Petition of Right said no man can be compelled to basically to pay a tax without consent by Parliament. The people need the consent to give it. The U.S. Constitution says all bills for raising revenue for taxes must originate in the House of Representatives. The people have to do it. The English Bill of Rights said those subjects which are Protestants may have arms for their defense. What does that sound like? Our Second Amendment. You have the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The English Bill of Rights is almost identical to our Ninth Amendment. Excessive bail ought not to be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. Word for word. We copied England in a lot of stuff. We basically took their best stuff. And you go back to what Reverend Kraft was saying. We hold these truths to be self-evident. That's what I was talking about. You know what right and wrong is. It's the best proof that there's a God. Now, does it prove, that the Catholic Church is right, or the Baptist Church is right, or even that, that Jesus was raised from the dead or anything? No, but it shows that there is a God. All right? That much is written on our hearts for sure. Then we go to witness. We go to eyewitness, people, the testimony of the Bible and other things. But we know in our hearts, all men are created equal. We're given rights from a creator, God. All right? God is mentioned 4 times in the Declaration of Independence. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. This is the key phrase I'm going to talk about here. To secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. We create rights. The purpose of government is to protect rights, right? The Declaration says God exists, we have rights. They're not privileges that the government can take away whenever they feel like it, right? And it's obvious, we get these rights from God. And the purpose of government is to create, to protect rights that we already have. It doesn't give us any of our rights. It doesn't give us what we need. The purpose of government is to protect our rights. All right? And the Constitution embodies these principles. And how do they do that? Well, there's all kinds of government. There's the traditional king, right? A monarchy, a rule by one. There's the most common form of government in human history, an oligarchy, a rule by a few. A military junta. This took over in Egypt this past week. A Politburo in the old Soviet Union. There's always a protectively, and they protect the ruling group's interests. All right, the majority is sometimes suppressed, sometimes murdered. Democracy is ruled by majority. That's not much better. I mean, if you're in the majority, it's maybe not so bad. But if you're in the minority, majority rules. If I were to say here, let's vote. Should boys get in line first for lunch or girls? All right? There's more boys in this room than girls right now. Fair?
Yeah.
Oh, the boys say fair. Okay. It's the rights of minorities need to be protected too. And that's one of the big problems with democracy. All right? Minority rights are often taken away. All right? And also, democracies are never stable. You get leaders come up and sell their stories and their leadership to the majority by buying votes, by promising to give the majority more money or some special benefit. And they take power and it reverts to oligarchy. The system we pledge allegiance to is a republic. It's a rule by law. The purpose of government is to protect those individual rights against bad majorities and minorities. And usually it has a constitution. We have all kinds of undemocratic things in America. The jury is not by majority vote. If you are going to be convicted of a crime in any federal court and in 48 of the 50 states, it has to be unanimous, 12 out of 12. All right, and the other ones are 10 to 2, I think. So it's none of them are majority. We have a constitution. To amend the Constitution, it's not majority vote. It is 2/3 of the Congress, House and Senate, and 3/4 of the states. Why? To protect minorities against the majority. All right, there's all kinds of things that we have. And Congress is created as the most important branch. The legislative branch is, in every free government, the legislative branch dominates. In every tyranny, the executive branch dominates. And we have a whole bunch of things, ways of protecting ourselves from a small group of people taking over or the majority taking over that are written into the Constitution. And one of them is to make Congress the most powerful branch because it's the most numerous. And they decided to give Congress the power of the sword. The president cannot take us to war, not constitutionally. All right? Congress was given the power to declare war, to make rules for the military. Don't ask, don't tell. That was done by Congress. All right? The president can't get rid of it. The Congress is given power to punish pirates, or today we would call them terrorists. All right? Congress passed essentially a letter of marque and reprisal against the Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. They have the power to fund or not fund the military. Congress has all of the powers. The president's powers are only, with regard to war, are only in an emergency when Congress can't be summoned. And I'll go over that in a minute. Congress also has the power to spend money. They call it the power of the purse. All taxes have to begin in the House of Representatives. The president can't spend a dime without Congress first approving it. All right? And direct taxes have to be apportioned among the states. Taxation and representation go together. You have a direct tax, like if you have a property tax or an excise tax on your car. Some of you guys are old enough to drive. That, if it's at the federal level, it has to be apportioned. All right? An indirect tax has to be on, which is on a conditional event, like a sales tax or an import tax. That just has to be the same for every state. All right, and here's what I meant by the president's power on war. This is from James Madison's notes on the Constitutional Convention. He said, they were talking about, well, what's the Congress's power? Is it to declare war or make war? And Roger Sherman said, I think that's pretty good. The president ought to be able to repel and not to begin war. Make is better than declare. And Elbridge Gerry, Massachusetts delegate, says, I never expect to hear in a republic a motion to empower the president alone to declare war. And yet that's what happened last year with Libya. You know, the United States sent American forces to Libya without congressional approval, and really even without congressional notification. So they went on. George Mason from Virginia said he's against giving the power of war to the executive. Why? Because the president is not to be safely trusted with it, or to the Senate because they're not entitled to it. He wants to clog war, not make it easier to go to war, and he wants it to make it easier to go to peace. The Founding Fathers loved peace. They had enough of war. They didn't want us to go to war for no reason. They said, let's make sure Congress is behind it first before we do it. And here's just a short outline of the Constitution. Article 1 is the legislative branch. There's two parts of it. The House of Representatives, which is directly elected by the people, and then the Senate, until 1913, was directly elected by the state legislatures. It represented the state legislatures. And there's two for every state. The House is done by population, so Massachusetts has 9, New Hampshire has 2, Pennsylvania has, 17, something like that. Most powers are granted to Congress in Article 1, Section 8, and there's sort of a mini Bill of Rights in here in Section 9. The President is created, the executive branch, in Article 2, and he has a few powers that are significant, but less than Congress. The Supreme Court is created in Article 3. There's more stuff about the states in Article 4. Constitutional amendment, you want to change the Constitution, both procedures, both the Constitutional Convention and the regular amendment method is there. The Supremacy Clause, and this was a temporary measure of how it can be ratified. There's 5 ways the Founding Fathers sought to stop a ruling group from taking over America. And the first one I'm going to talk about is checks and balances, all right? Each of the 3 branches, I should probably talk about separation of powers because we just went over that. They separated the 3 branches by their function. The legislative branch, Congress, makes the laws. The president, the executive branch, enforces the laws. And the judicial branch judges whether or not, in a particular case, that the law has been broken. Then what they did was they set up each group with its own body, and they said, let's make sure that every branch has a stop on the other branch. It's called checks and balances, all right? Another way to delay or influence the other branches. Then they said, okay, let's make sure that the federal government doesn't have all the power. We'll keep most of the power at the state level. Federalism, a division of powers between 2 or more levels of government, and the Christian principle of subsidiarity. Everything should be done on the lowest level. I teach in a Catholic school. They use this term, but it's in the Bible. When you have a disagreement with a brother, I forget exactly the phrase where it's in. Maybe Reverend Kraft can help me out. First, you discuss it with them one-on-one. Then, if you can't resolve it, you get one friend to come in. And then, finally, you bring in a larger group, and if you can't discuss it, then you get rid of them. But the idea is keep everything on the smallest level. And that works for government, too, okay? We talked about delegated or enumerated powers with the video. Congress only has a specific list of things it can't go beyond. Billy, in the video, went way beyond that. He just reinterpreted out of total, it was totally irrational what he did. And then finally, reservation of powers. Even though we have a list of things government can do and it can't do anything else, they put in, just in case Congress goes out of control, let's put in a list of some of the key things to make sure that they don't do them anyway. All right? Here's checks and balances. And every branch checks the other branch. Sometimes the branches check themselves. In the legislative branch, it checks itself. You've got one elected by the people, one represents the Senate, represents the states. How does a legislative branch stop the president? Well, they can impeach him. They can override his veto. They can appoint, the Senate appoints all the senior people. If the president wants to appoint somebody to a senior office, like Secretary of Defense or Secretary of State, has to be approved by the Senate. Same thing with the judicial branch. They can impeach a judge. they can actually abolish the court. They, except for the Supreme Court, they can abolish any court that they think is not doing the job. They can deny the jurisdiction. This has happened from time to time, and this is what they ought to do on cases related to abortion. They could just say, if there's any case related to abortion, federal courts can't rule on it. And that's Congress's power, and the courts just say, well, we can't do it. If the states get out of control on not violating the 14th Amendment or something, they can just pass a law saying presidents should enforce this. And the president stops the legislative branch. How? He vetoes the bills. He stops the judicial branch or influences the judicial branch because he appoints the judges. And he can issue an executive order if the states aren't following the law. All right? Judges, they have pretty much a one-trick pony. They have what's called judicial review. They can declare a law unconstitutional, or a presidential executive order unconstitutional, or a state law unconstitutional. States have a lot of powers. Originally they had the Senate. They have the power to abolish the Constitution, to go to a constitutional convention. And even a regular amendment has to be approved by the states. And finally, they have the power to nullify. Under the 10th Amendment, they can say, this is unconstitutional. We're not going to follow this federal law. We're not going to allow it to be enforced in our state. Jefferson and Madison wrote about this in 1798 when John Adams signed the Sedition Act that said, if you criticize the president, you go to jail. And they went around looking for newspaper editors who had criticized John Adams and put him in jail. So Jefferson and Madison said, wait a minute, this is against the First Amendment, it's against the 10th Amendment. Let's say it can't be enforced in Virginia. Let's say it can't be enforced in Kentucky. And it worked. And of course, Jefferson was elected president shortly after that, and they got rid of it. But it's been done a number of times over history. And the same thing goes for presidential executive orders. President Obama's executive orders related to Obamacare, related to gun control measures, are being nullified across the states right now. Judicial branch. A lot of times, the courts issue a decision, and the states say, we don't care, we're not going to follow it. All right? And of course, the states sort of check each other, because if you don't like what's going on in Massachusetts, if the taxes are too high, and it's Massachusetts, you can go to New Hampshire where there's no income tax. All right? The other thing they have is federalism and separation of powers. We separated the power of the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. I already discussed that. Federalism is this. Most of the powers, there's a few powers at the federal government, but there's more at the state government and more at the local government. Of course, there's separation of powers at the state level too, right? You have a state legislature. In fact, we're going to see I think we're going to see a few people who are state legislators in New Hampshire. And New Hampshire has an executive branch called the governor. And it has a judicial branch. It has a state Supreme Court and state courts. Even at the local level, you have a legislative branch, town meeting, or if you live in a city, the city council makes the laws. They have an executive, the mayor or the selectman enforces the laws. And a lot of times you even have local judicial branch things, like that ruling on zoning things. Running a little short of time here, so I'm going to skip over this. But the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was adopted because the Founding Fathers campaigned for it. All right, the states didn't have to ratify the Constitution. They could have gone on their own way, and New Hampshire did, not New Hampshire, Rhode Island did for 4 years. They didn't ratify the Constitution until 1791, 92. So they were their own country for a few years. But James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay convinced the farmers in all 13 states to ratify the Constitution. Excuse me. And many of them demanded, hey, we need this Bill of Rights. We need a list of things the federal government can't do so that we can make sure that they don't do it. All right? Because it's about protecting rights, dividing up government power, not about giving the power to make decisions to a president or to a group of leaders. And when we talk about enumerated powers with the video, if you remember going back to Billy, James Madison wrote in his address to the Virginia legislature against the Alien and Sedition Act, he said, the preamble says we've all said it, I don't know how many times over the last 24 hours, right? We the people, in order to form a more perfect union. Keep going. Common defense, okay? Promote the general welfare, okay? Well, does that give Congress the power to do anything they want in the form of general welfare? No. Because he said, had the states been taken, if their power to, if they've been taken, their power had been taken away by the generality of the preamble, if they could do whatever they want under the list, under promote the general welfare, and the federal government endowed with the power to do whatever they should judge instrumental or useful toward union, justice, tranquility, common defense, general welfare, preservation of liberty, nothing would have been more frivolous than an enumeration of powers. What's frivolous mean? Yeah, a waste of time, right? Why would you say, why would Billy's mom say, right? You may buy fresh veggies, you may buy fresh fruit, you may buy lean meats, and then say, and you can buy whatever food you want. No. This was about, and this is what it was about. And what that basically was, the preamble is an introduction. It's a summary of what a clause will do, but it's not actually what it does. Let's look at a couple other examples. All right. I'm going to skip that. The Bill of Rights has a couple of constitutional amendments that have their own preambles. Here's the preamble to the Second Amendment. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the preservation of a free state. The militia was all the people. It's important for the people to be free, that they be armed. All right? Then it goes on and says, here's the active part. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The active part is, you have the right to keep and bear arms because if you don't have the security of a free state. All right, it has nothing to do with hunting. That's a nice pastime. It has nothing even to do with personal defense. It's about fighting back against your government. All right? Let's look at this, the Fourth Amendment. This is the one that's particularly under siege today. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So they're basically saying police, federal officials can't do an unreasonable search against your house. Well, when has a cop ever come to a house and said, I want to search it, and it's an unreasonable search? Well, it's always reasonable in their view. So this is just a preamble. This is